Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our webinar today is entitled Adapted Physical Education, and our presenters today are Eva Kabinski, Dr. Sally Jones, and Dr. Brock McMullen. Eva Kabinski is a school administrative consultant on the Wisconsin DPI special education team, responsible for supporting specially designed physical education. Dr. Sally Jones is the physical education consultant for the Wisconsin DPI and brings extensive experience as a former professor at UW-Stevens Point. Dr. Brock McMullen is the professor for adaptive physical education teacher preparation at the University of Wisconsin at La Crosse and the director of the Center on Disability Health and Adaptive Physical Activity. It's my great pleasure today to introduce to you Eva, Sally, and Brock.
Thank you, Bonnie. This is Eva Kabinski, and I want to just say I really cherish the ongoing relationship that I've had with Wisconsin Facets and with Bonnie, because it gives us an opportunity to share information with a wider audience and a wider range of participants. So thank you for taking the time from your busy day to listen to what we have to say. We do have our contact information at the end of the presentation, so that if you have further questions that we have not been able to answer, you can reach us through that, through those addresses. So what I'd like to do is now allow my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Sally Jones. Sally?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you could be here. I wanted to let you know that I find working with students with disabilities near and dear to my heart. And it's one of the things that I work closely with, or I work closely with Eva with, on ensuring that our teachers and our college preparation programs are getting the necessary information and training that they need. So thank you for joining us in today's webinar, and look forward to talking to you about some of our passions around adapted physical education.
Thank you, Sally. And now Brock McMullen. Brock?
Hi there, everybody. Thank you all for joining us, and I want to say a quick thank you to Wisconsin Facets and the Department of Public Instruction for hosting this webinar and asking me to be a part of it. As was mentioned earlier, I am an assistant professor of adapted physical education here at UW-La Crosse. I'm a former physical and adapted physical education teacher, and I am in my third year here at UW-La Crosse, where my primary responsibilities are to prepare undergraduate and graduate students to work in the field of adapted physical education, and including students with disabilities in all aspects of physical activity. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to this presentation.
Thank you, Brock. And I'm Eva Kabinski, and Bonnie kind of gave you a little overview of what I do. And I do have to say that the work that I do around the issues of adapted physical education really rely on the knowledge and input of both Sally and Brock and others that are working in this field. So today we're going to give ourselves an opportunity to share with you a little bit more information about adapted physical education. But before I do that, I do want to remind you all that in Wisconsin, starting when Governor Evers was our state superintendent, and now continuing under the leadership of our current state superintendent, Carolyn Stanford Taylor, is a real commitment to providing equity to all of our students. And the way that we're trying to do that is to make sure that every student has access to the educational resources and the rigor in those resources that they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, sexual orientation, family background, and/or family income. And this is a commitment that we are making department-wide, and all of our work is focused on trying to reduce the opportunity gaps that we see between some of our Wisconsin students. So today, the plan is that we're going to share several topics related to adapted physical education, including the law, the terms that tend to be used, what are the indicators of a quality program, and also introducing the concept of universal design for learning. The law under IDEA says that we are required as educators to make sure that students with IEPs are provided at no cost to the parent a free and appropriate public education. This in Wisconsin, because physical education is considered an academic content area like reading and mathematics, we have a responsibility to make sure that that's something that we examine to see if the student's disability related needs might get in the way of their ability to access the content in a physical education program. When students have disability related needs that do interfere with accessing that instruction, specially adapted physical education is required. And what we're going to do is I'm going to pass this on to Dr. Jones, and she's going to share with you some of the terms that we use when we discuss the concept of adapted physical education. Sally?
Thanks, Eva. So a few terms that you're going to hear today: adapted, adaptive, specially designed physical education, and universal design can be confusing to some. Two in particular that get often mixed up are the terms adapted and adaptive. Eva, would you mind going ahead and going to the next slide, because I want to go ahead and throw those definitions up. Thank you.
Absolutely,
So,
just let me know when you want me to advance.
oh, and by the way, I'm always going to allow anyone who has, like, for example, my colleague Brock, I always invite him to jump in with anything that is pertinent. So please know that I welcome that as well. So let's go back and look at adapted versus adaptive. So if we think about adapted physical education, we're looking at how an activity can be modified for a student with a disability. So we're looking at what it takes for someone to participate and to learn and be successful and safe and have that experience in physical education. Now, the term adaptive it's more aligned with the terminology of behavior, and we use that to describe technologies or devices that will assist in that learning. So we want to make sure that we're saying adapted physical education. However, the two get mixed up all the time, and it happens. But if we want to move forward, I wanted you to understand why we're using the term adapted versus the term adaptive. One of the other terms that that we saw on that list was specially designed physical education. And that is also a term that can get confused with adapted physical education. What is the difference between adapted physical education and specially designed physical education? Well, here's the big secret. There isn't much difference. It's how sometimes the terms are used within policy or within law. Specially designed physical education is about meeting the unique needs of individual students with and without disabilities. Guess what? That's the same thing for adapted physical education. It is a service that is provided. So there's not a difference, but you will hear specially designed physical education in some areas. You might hear adapted physical education, but they are pretty much the same thing. It's all about differentiated learning, looking at instructions, making adaptations, modifications, thinking about how we plan to work with students with varying abilities. The last term that we saw was the universal design for learning, also known as UDL. And that is a system of how we look at how we do teaching. And we're going to dive deeper into UDL later. So I'm not going to expand on that, but I'm going to turn it over to Brock, because to understand UDL, you actually have to understand what are the quality components of a physical education program. And my good friend Brock is going to help explain that.
So when it comes to adapted physical education and looking at an adapted physical education program, there are some indicators that we would like to identify that might show you the level of quality of that particular program. And the first indicator I want to talk about today is the qualifications or certifications of the teacher. In the state of Wisconsin, any licensed physical education teacher may legally teach students with disabilities within physical education, including providing adapted physical education or specially designed physical education services. In addition, however, the state of Wisconsin does offer a license in adapted physical education that may be issued to somebody who holds a physical education license and who has completed an approved program with a concentration in adapted physical education. And within this program, it must include the areas of the foundations of the special education process, the nature of a child with a disability, knowledge related to modifications of content, instructional strategies, and the learning environment, also knowledge related to specific assessment and a program evaluation, and then also those programs must include a clinical component as well, working with kids with disabilities within a physical education setting. Wisconsin is actually one of 13 states within the country that offers a specific teaching license related to adapted PE. For additional knowledge and expertise, an adaptive physical education teacher may also pursue the CAPE certification, or the Certified Adapted Physical Educator certification, from the National Consortium on Physical Education for Individuals with Disabilities. This organization is responsible for the creation of the Adapted Physical Education National Standards, which has a goal to make APE more uniform across the country in practice, but also in the qualifications of the teachers who can make meaningful decisions for children with disabilities within physical education. So ultimately, you want your APE teachers to be certified primarily by the state within physical education and hopefully adapted physical education. And then secondarily, if possible, have that CAPE certification. In addition to the qualifications of teachers, we want to make sure that within the IEP process, specifically that the evaluation stage is comprehensive and uses data to inform decisions. It should be known that students need to qualify for specially designed or adapted physical education services. Therefore, it is essential that we use proper and valid assessments to obtain data or scores that accurately represent a student's current performance, and then make a judgment that is based on the test scores and other performance factors. We assess because it will help us provide a basis for instruction on what to teach and at what skill level that student might need to start at. And there are two types of assessments or standardized assessments that we could use for eligibility determination. We could use norm referenced or criterion referenced tests. Norm referenced tests allow for comparisons to other students and will give you information related to percentiles, such as that particular student scored in the 70th percentile for their age or gender. The other test that we could use is a criterion reference tests, which provide a level of mastery for the skill or ability being assessed. And these type of assessments generally represent an ability for the teacher and student to compare to that student's previous performance. So more of a self-monitored or monitoring self-progress. And then after an assessment is administered, the teacher should then look at that assessment data. And it's typically agreed upon that if a student falls 1.5 to 2 standard deviations below the mean on a norm reference test or scores at a level that is 2 years behind their same aged peers, that the student is then eligible for adapted physical education. So for example, if a student who is in 4th grade is assessed for adapted physical education, and based on the assessment info, if they score at the level of a 2nd grader or a 1st grader, then based on that 2 years behind their same age peers, they should be eligible for adapted physical education. So after assessment is done, goals and objectives must be developed and monitored for progress. And monitoring includes ongoing assessment with rubrics or other practical techniques so the teacher can determine if the student has achieved their goals and objectives. This periodic evaluation and reporting of students' progress towards these goals and objectives should occur at the minimum of the same frequency that non-disabled students are given progress reports. So generally in most schools, that would mean at least quarterly progress assessments or progress reports being sent home to parents or guardians. Next slide, please. Further indicators of a quality program is offering multiple placements for students with disabilities. Adapted physical education is physical education that is designed to meet the unique needs of a child in the least restrictive environment. This means that they should spend as much time as possible with their peers who do not receive special education. With that in mind, it is important to remember that APE is a service to the student. It is not a placement, and that a student can be educated in multiple placements when receiving their adapted physical education services during the week, during the quarter, or semester. And it is all based on individual student need. These different placement options can range from inclusion within the general PE class with some support from an adapted physical education teacher. It could also be inclusion in the general PE class with constant and repeated work with the adapted physical education teacher. It could also include 1 day a week within the general education class and 1 day a week with the adapted physical education teacher. Or it could be a segregated class apart from their same age peers. But the reason that we have multiple placements for students with disabilities and adapted physical education is, again, we want them to be educated in the least restrictive environment, and it's based on their need. And some students may be more successful within a segregated environment. Some students may be more successful in an inclusive environment. But again, it is all based on student need, and those decisions need to be made at an individual level and on an individual basis. If a student qualifies for adapted physical education, it should not be automatically assumed that they are going to be educated in a segregated environment away from their same aged and non-disabled peers. The next step is IEP development and goal creation. And this is where appropriate goals and objectives for the student in adaptive physical education are made based on the information that we've gathered from the assessment data. Next slide, please. The purpose of goals within an IEP are to establish a baseline for educational programming of what a student with a disability can be reasonably expected to accomplish or achieve within a calendar year with specially designed instruction. These goals are directly related to the student's present level of performance, which is a gathering from the assessment data and is generally a narrative statement with objective and measurable terms that describes the effect of a student's disability on their performance in a particular area of content. It also includes information from standardized assessments, and it also includes areas of need, strength, and personal interest of the student. These goals should then serve as the foundation or basis of lesson plan and activity development for that student over the course of the year. These goals are specific areas that the student with a disability is displaying a deficit, And lastly, because physical education instruction is guided by national instructional standards and grade level outcomes for kindergarten through 12th grade, these goals should be standards based and based on the child's need related to the standards, and it will also help them stay in step and on the same trajectory as students without disabilities. Next slide. And so as with any student who may be eligible for special education services, it's important that the adapted PE teacher is included within the eligibility determinations, and that information is also collected from all teachers that the student might interact with during a given day. As mentioned earlier, we talked about teacher qualifications. An APE teacher will have advanced and specific training related to working with kids with disabilities in a physical education setting. However, not every school or school district may have an adapted PE teacher on staff. If that is the case, the general PE teacher will have some basic knowledge related to educating students with disabilities and can use this basic or general PE knowledge to provide observations of difficulties and use their professional judgment to provide a basic decision related to the potential need of specialized services. Because there should be an official assessment or evaluation conducted, you may also want to contact an APE teacher from another district or potentially university personnel who could provide extra guidance. Especially in an initial evaluation, the IEP team should consider the physical education or adapted physical education teacher to provide input. This request should come from the parents to have that evaluation conducted within the area of physical education. And as I mentioned before, any licensed physical education teacher within the state of Wisconsin can implement adapted physical education services. Next slide, please.
So, hi, it's Sally again, and we're going to talk about universal design for learning and how this all plays into adaptive physical education and its role. So initially, universal design was an architectural engineering terminology. So I'm sure many of you have walked down a sidewalk, and when you get to the end of the sidewalk and you have to cross a road, the sidewalk kind of dips and levels out with the road. And that is so that a wheelchair or someone who has an ambulatory disability can easily access onto or off of the sidewalk. And that's universal design. It's access that is for all. So that theory and that idea has been transferred into, okay, so how do we take universal design and make it for a learning aspect? And so it basically is looking at how teachers and educators and school staff can really make learning accessible and equitable for every single student, both with and without disabilities of all varying abilities. Let me I want to make a statement, a very important statement, that you should understand that UDL is not a special education initiative, nor is it a general education initiative. It is a every child initiative. So it's looking at how an educator or how school staff are really going to take an equitable lens at educating every student. It's an approach for teaching, learning, and assessment, drawing on different brain research and technologies that respond to an individual learner's differences. And it is a way for teachers to really make everything accessible in their classroom. So I want to give you another example. So let's take a swimming pool. once upon a time, swimming pools, the only way that you can get in and out of a swimming pool was through the stairs. And that limited access for many people. Well, eventually they started learning that some people could not get into the pool through the stairs. So then they put in what would be a chair lift. And that was put in after they go, oh man, we messed up. Now, but here we can write it. We can write this wrong by adding a chair to lift people in and out. But if we are forward thinking, now in the design of swimming pools, a lot of swimming pools that are accessible to everyone means that they have zero entry. So they no longer need a chair lift in and out, but anyone could walk in or be wheeled in with a zero entry, like a ramp or a slope, into the swimming pool. There are a couple of principles that play into universal design. And I want to show you this really unique cartoon. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So this cartoon, if you can see it, it's children trying to get into the school building, and the custodial staff is working very hard to shovel off the snow. Totally true for Wisconsin, right? We're about to have a bunch of snow. And he's trying really hard. He's thinking about the kids and trying to get the snow cleared off of the steps so that the kids could get in. However, he's not clearing off the ramp for the child in the wheelchair. However, if he cleared the ramp first, then all students could use the ramp. So it just gives us an idea that our teachers have to be able to think broadly and plan. Now this gets really interesting because it doesn't mean that a physical education teacher cannot do this. Actually, any teacher can use a UDL strategy. If we can go to the next slide, thank you, please. There are some principles that we use with EDL. There's means of engagement, which is how to tap into learners' interests and how to get them engaged. There's means of representation, which is how we give learners various ways of requiring information or knowledge. And then there's principles of, principles of engagement would be to tap into the learner's interests. Then representation, multiple means of representation is to give learners various ways of acquiring information and knowledge. And then action and expression, which is sort of that means of representation, means how we provide learners with alternatives or demonstrating what they know. So instead of a teacher giving just verbal instructions, a teacher who is forward thought about this, regardless of who they have in their classroom, they might go, okay, I know that I need to have not only I can give vocal instructions, but I can have written instructions, I can have recorded instructions, I can have pictures with my instructions. And so I'm thinking about all the modes in which my students can learn from the types of instruction that I'm going to give, so that I'm thinking about everyone. And it is a forward thinking process. So I have to really, teachers need to kind of think about the planning and what goes into planning. So a teacher can have extremely good content knowledge. They could know everything there is to know about teaching a specific skill, throwing or jumping or teaching sports strategies. But they also have to have really good strategies of thinking about, all right, how am I going to assess my students, all of my students, not just the able-bodied ones or the ones who are athletes. How am I going to assess all my students to know that they've learned something? How am I going to plan my lessons? And so that's when we think about a really good teaching is looking at every single possibility in every class. So I can fully admit, when I was an early teacher, I was only writing lesson plans for the students that were in my class, and I wasn't really thinking about how writing plans or creating opportunities for someone who might come into my class with a disability. So now when we think about writing lesson plans, we want to write lesson plans that will cater to any type of student. So again, thinking about what kind of instructions am I going to give and modalities that I'm going to use when I'm in trying to engage my learner. Looking at how am I going to assess that student and the number of modalities that I'm going to use to assess that student. Is my assessment equitable? Can every student use that assessment? If not, then I need to look at my assessment and reevaluate. So there's a lot of different opportunities. If we'll go to slide 17, please. Yeah, so it's looking at, thinking about and valuing diversity, thinking about how I want to design my classroom. Am I looking at my equipment? So am I looking at my environment? Is my environment really too loud for certain particular students? If it is, how am I going to navigate that? Do I have headphones for those certain students? Do I need to take them outside where there's where it is not so echoey? And if it's raining, then what do I do? It's looking at, okay, is my equipment too big, too small? Can I adapt my equipment? Some of this occurs naturally, some of it does not. So it really involves a lot of forward thinking. Is there technology that I can use that will help enhance the learning of my students? And again, looking at how I'm going to assess. So that is where we want to really think about universal design. If we think about the multiple intelligence theory, that was Gardner back in the early 90s, there are several theories. One of the theories is consistent with what are we discovering about the learning of the brain, namely that students do not have one global learning capacity, but many multifaceted learning capacities, and that a disability or a challenge in one area may be countered by an extraordinary ability in another. There are three main areas of UDL research that go into this, and it's looking at, okay, recognition, being strategic, and the affective networks. So if I'm thinking about recognition, it's enabling individuals to identify and understand information and ideas and concepts. How am I going to get them to recognize this information, identify and understand this information? And that falls back onto the teacher of how I'm going to deliver that. Being strategic is enabling individuals to plan, execute, and monitor actions and skills. So we've got to figure out, we've got to plan how this student is going to be able to do this. How am I going to, as the teacher, monitor these actions and skills? And then the affective is enabling individuals to engage with the tasks and learning and with the world, and making these learning tasks authentic. It's through this, every student is addressed as an individual with unique needs, interests, and abilities. I love giving the example of badminton, because I love playing badminton, and all of my students love playing badminton. And like an early teacher in my early 20s, I played badminton in its traditional form. I had a net put up at the regulation height. I had the regulation size court, and I had the regulation birdies with the regulation size badminton rackets. And I was watching some of my students struggle with this, struggling with making good contact with the birdie, with striking the birdie with the racket, and then them trying to get it over the net and into the correct box, and then being able to move around. And so what I learned over time was, okay, can I teach the concept of badminton, but change the game, but change it? So I don't have to have a regulation size court. My net does not have to be this high. My net could be at the ground level, or better yet, maybe I don't have a net at all. Maybe I put everybody on a scooter on the floor. Maybe we start with hand paddles instead of big rackets. Instead of regular birdies, maybe I do what's called a volley birdie. Or maybe we do balloons because it has a slower float time and it gives students a better time to react to that. Or maybe we play with just a foam ball. So it was looking at, okay, how important is it that I actually teach my students the traditional format of badminton versus teaching them the skill of striking and game strategy, and how can I do that using something like badminton, but changing it so that everybody can be involved. And that's what universal design does. I had to make sure, I had to ask myself, is what I'm doing harming any of my students, both with disabilities and without? And because a lot of people and some teachers would go, well, then the older kids or the kids with no disabilities aren't learning the proper way. Well, what are they not learning? And is it causing any harm? Are they working on striking? Yes. So usually in universal design, every student benefits. So that's what it's really all about, is that every student is addressed and all their abilities and their interests and your unique needs are met in an equitable way. So why is it important for students? So when we create varied and multiple pathways for students to follow for a learning outcome, it's more likely that the students will get to that destination, be successful, and have greater enjoyment in playing. And so that's what universal design is.
Yeah, Sally, if I may jump in just quickly here to kind of put a closing point on universal design for learning, and one of the reasons why it is so important in physical education is this idea of students with disabilities being educated in the least restrictive environment.
Right.
Because universal design for learning obviously takes the specific needs of students into account. It also doesn't ignore the students who may be able to succeed and be successful with your standard instruction and your standard presentation of materials. What universal design for learning does, it allows for all students to be able to take in the information, to be able to show or display that they've learned that piece of information, and then that in turn allows for all students to work together, to be involved in a collaborative effort towards a common goal. And that is where inclusion and including students with disabilities within the general PE environment, or in certain settings where students with and without disabilities are working together, is extremely important for both the physical development of students, but also for the social and emotional development of our students as well.
Yes.
So universal design for learning will obviously have some physical benefits for all the students involved, but if done correctly, it will also have an extreme impact and a very important impact on the social and emotional development of all of our students as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Brock. So I think we're going to just summarize here.
Yeah, so Brock and Sally, thank you for sharing your expertise. I always run into this I wouldn't say it's a problem, but when I get to hear from experts in the field, I want to go back and share that knowledge and use that back the way I did in the day when I was working in school districts. So what we wanted to make sure that we provided to you today were certain ideas and main concepts. One is that, again, adapted physical education is a service, not a placement or a place. That especially in an initial evaluation, the IEP team should consider including the physical education or adapted physical education teacher to provide input, especially if concerns shared either by the family or by the students' teachers indicate that there may be some difficulty accessing physical education content, that any licensed physical education teacher can implement adapted physical education, and that universal design is an every student initiative, not a general education or special education initiative, but for all of our students. So at this point, Bonnie, do we have any questions in the chat box?
Actually, we have a couple. One is just about what you were summarizing on, actually, and talking about a physical education teacher, regular physical education teacher, as opposed to an adapted physical education teacher. And when I think this was probably mostly directed to some of the things that Brock was talking about. When you talk about an individual who has a certification in physical education, how do we entrust that person with the knowledge and skills and expertise that's necessary for them to provide the adapted services that are necessary for a particular child? And that, taking that one step further, are we actually saying that the regular licensed person in physical education is the quote highly qualified person to provide that service?
Mhm. Brock, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, and I'll answer as much as I can, and if I miss a part, please ask me the question or parts that I missed. But I would say no. First of all, that the teacher with only a physical education or general physical education license is not necessarily the highly qualified individual. The highly qualified individual would be somebody who has, excuse me, that adapted physical education teacher's license or certification on their resume. And so to answer the other question of how can we entrust that the adapted physical education teacher, or I'm sorry, the general physical education teacher is providing the appropriate services. That's a difficult one, but I would say that the best way to do that, or some of the questions that you might ask, would be to ask the teacher, where do you develop, your lesson plans? Where do you develop your objectives and goals? Do you follow the grade level outcomes from the Society of Health and Physical Education, our national governing body on PE? Do you follow the grade level outcomes? Do you follow the national standards? And do you teach to that content? And then again, ask them as well, if it is just a general physical education teacher providing those services, what sort of assessments did you conduct to determine eligibility for adapted physical education? So there'd be a few things that I would ask. Like I said, what kind of assessments did you use to determine eligibility? Do you follow and do you teach by the SHAPE standards that guide most quality physical education instruction? And do you follow the grade level outcomes that are, quote unquote, assigned for each of the particular grade levels, so that students are making an appropriate progression through their physical education programs? I think that answered both parts. Let me know. Please repeat if I missed a portion.
Well, and
Well,
Brock, if this is Eva, if I could add to that,
Yeah.
in Wisconsin, we do allow licensed physical education teachers to provide adapted physical education. And one of the things that is a caveat related to that is that if you have a general education licensed physical educator who is providing adaptive physical education, that's okay, but the school district cannot use special education funds to pay for that staff member. So that's a fiscal difference that comes up. Sally, you sound like you were going to say something too?
I was just going to say also, again, a general physical education teacher who might not have those additional certifications or the additional licensure doesn't mean that it doesn't always mean that they're not doing a very good job with their students with disabilities. It comes down to looking at the quality aspects of a program that Brock went through. Also, a teacher who might be using universal design for learning is keeping the diversity of their students in mind there. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sally. And then also I just want to mention is that most every job application, or not, sorry, job application, but job announcement that I see out there in school districts within the state of Wisconsin are asking that the physical education teachers have the general PE license, but also the adapted physical education license as well. Just again, further ensuring that the teachers that are going to be providing those services, even if it might not be specifically adapted PE, are prepared to include students with disabilities within their classes.
So that's a shift in terms of hiring practices.
Yes.
So and I believe you shared with Sally and myself that your training program is actually going to be shifting related to that.
Yeah, currently we offer our students the option if they want to add on the adaptive physical education emphasis, but starting next fall, so the fall of 2021, all students who are in our UW La Crosse physical education program will be obtaining their adaptive physical education certification or license as well.
Okay, thank you for that information. I think that'll make a big difference in how the physical education teacher is viewed with being able to deal with individuals with disabilities in the highly qualified manner. The next question that's here is one that asks, how do you see occupational therapy working in with adaptive physical education? We haven't talked about OT pretty much, and lots of times the OT is a consultant to like the physical education teacher. So how do you see that relationship?
So if I can start and then I'll let Brock finish up. The way that I view this is that the OT and the PT and the physical education teacher all have to collaborate together to determine what is best for that student. Now, OTs and PTs do some things a little differently, but there are areas in which they can collaborate on specific things that can help build for each other. So it will require that these folks with the services, including the physical education teacher, sort of reach across and go, hey, to the OT or to the PT, what can we do in physical education that will assist with the therapy that you're doing with that student, and vice versa. It's really good for the OT or the PT to also reach out to the physical education teacher and to talk about the therapy plan and the education plan together.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sally. And one of the areas, and I think that we do a good job of preparing our students to go out into the schools, is to work in what is called the motor team. And the motor team we refer to as the adapted PE teacher, physical therapist, and occupational therapist. And the three of them should definitely be working together in conjunction in meeting the students' goals. So like Sally mentioned, the PE teacher, the APE teacher, can assist with some of the maybe occupational therapy objectives that they might be working on, and therapists could also work on some of the stuff that they're helping with in PE. But it's also important to distinguish that occupational or physical therapy is not an academic content area, and physical education is. So there is a very distinct difference, especially in learning outcomes and learning objectives of our students. But when it comes, and also just a reminder that physical or occupational therapy cannot replace physical education or adapted physical education, but the three professions should definitely be working together to meet the physical and motor needs of students with disabilities.
And this is Eva. And just a reminder to our audience that occupational therapy and physical therapy are what we call related services. As Brock said, they are not they're not necessarily addressing a primary content area. What the purpose of related services is to allow the student to access specially designed instruction, and then through the specially designed instruction, access the content. So again, that's the lens that IEP teams use when they look at their physical therapists and their occupational therapists. What does the student need in order to be able to access specially designed instruction, which in this case would be adapted physical education? So that is an important collaboration, and I love the idea of a motor team where everybody would communicate and connect in terms of developing what kind of supports the student needs in order to access the content.
These were really good questions. Bonnie, do we have any more?
I have one more, and actually it states, many of the children with disabilities really need someone to work with them as it relates to some lifetime skills in sports. How do you see adapted physical education playing into that role?
Okay, so it's the same. Adapted physical education is the same for preparing students for being active for a lifetime. And there are lots of different programs out there that can be done within schools and outside of schools, like a YMCA or Boys and Girls Club. There's a program that's called If I Can Do It, You Can Do It. And it's a whole school initiative that that pairs students with a non-disability, a student with a disability, to work on movement goals and nutrition goals. And it's all about sort of that lifetime fitness, where we're thinking about students being able to participate in sports and having the skills to be able to do that, and having skills for lifelong motor abilities. So that is definitely, they work together. That's exactly what adapted is. Adapted is working on meeting those long-term goals, and it really should fall back on the standards and the grade level outcomes for those goals to achieve lifetime fitness and lifetime wellness.
Yes, yeah, adapted PE is essentially working hand in hand with the general PE program. And if the general PE program is following a standards-based instructional model, then students, when they start to get to that secondary level, specifically high school, they should all begin to be learning about how to be physically active for a lifetime in the community, especially. And adaptive physical education should follow along with that model of teaching students how to be active outside of school. And so again, adaptive PE and general PE can work hand in hand in ensuring that those outcomes are met for all students, regardless of ability.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of our questions. If any of you have closing remarks you'd like to make.
Well, I did want to share that the slide that I have up right now is a series of resources related to the work that the three of us are doing in adaptive physical education. It includes a link to the center that Brock is the director of, related to disability health and adapted physical activity. We also have a specific DPI bulletin that was written about physical education for children with disabilities. We also have Sally's page, which is the DPI physical education and physical activity page, which includes, I believe, links to the just recently updated Wisconsin physical education standards, which
Yes.
Brock was part of the development team with Sally on that. And then we also have a page around specially designed physical education, which I will tell you, I will be speaking to my supervisor later on this afternoon about changing the name of that to adapted physical education so that we're consistent across all of our different areas. But these are all resources that help answer some of the questions that have come up, that may answer and provide ideas around questions that you haven't thought of yet. And then we also have the contact information for both Sally, Brock, and myself. And we'd encourage you to contact us if there are some things that come up that you have questions about, or if you have a physical education teacher that you feel might need some additional ideas. That's part of our job, and we're here to provide that support. Sally and Brock, anything in closing that you'd like to say?
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope that the information that we've been given you has been insightful and helpful going forward.
Yes, I hope you all enjoyed and thought of this information as being beneficial. And I frequently get, and I just want to mention that I frequently get inquiries from different teachers from around the country about how to properly implement different adapted physical education, teaching strategies, whether it be instruction or assessment. And so if there's any parents out there listening right now that do have questions about the type of instruction that their child is or is not receiving, I am more than happy to have a conversation with you about those services.
And Bonnie has been kind enough to ask us back next year to do this again. So if there are some specific issues that you would like to have addressed in a future training, please feel free to send it to any of us or to Bonnie. And should we find that there's something that's coming up frequently, we will try and see if we can do something in the meanwhile that will provide further information. So again, Bonnie, thank you to you and Facets for allowing us to share this information. And thank you again to the audience for taking the time to listen.
Well, thank the three of you, Sally and Brock and Eva, for your expertise and for a great webinar today. I know that I've learned quite a bit, and I'm sure those in attendance have learned as well. This will conclude our webinar for today. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Please be reminded that Wisconsin Facets still has a wealth of trainings and webinars for the remainder of this year. Please feel free to check out our website calendar and register for any of those upcoming trainings that you are interested in. And please watch for the short evaluation coming your way after today's presentation. Again, thank you, Sally and Brock and Eva, for participating and giving us this webinar today. Bye, everybody. Thank you again, and stay safe and be well. Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Have a good afternoon.